Right, good evening and welcome to Upfront on the Joy News channel. Now, tonight, we continue our conversation on Bank of Ghana's unprecedented loss, $6 billion US. I'll be engaging my guests and we will test the impact on the Ghanaian economy. After this break, former Finance Minister Seth Terkper will be my guest. Right, thank you very much for staying with us still on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Just like I said, in the 2022 fiscal year, the Bank of Ghana posted an unprecedented loss of $6 billion US. We are talking about 60.8 billion Ghana cedis. The reason why I say this is unprecedented is this is the first time that we are seeing such a huge loss. In fact, if you do the comparative analysis, it's twice the amount Ghana is anticipating to get from the IMF. I'm very fortunate to have with me on the show, joining me via Zoom, former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. Honorable, welcome. Good evening, Honorable.
Good evening, and I hope you can hear me clear.
Yes, loud and clear. I want us to start the conversation this way. Bank of Ghana is making a loss, $6 billion US. And the ever-mutating Cecilia Dapar case, just now we've seen that the OSP retrieved some cash from her house. We've done our own computations and we've realized that the amount in question, if you add the total amount of money stolen, how much is in her account, transaction over a certain period, and then also the value of the words involved, we are talking about 12.4 million US. What's your first take on this mutating issue?
Well, thank you very much. Let me say that I haven't been following just from the newspapers what is happening with respect to, the monies which the then Honorable Minister, as the lawyer says, is alleged to be keeping since it's now in court. So I wouldn't have much, to say, except to say that in the event that these are gifts and other things, then there are tax provisions, guiding this. Of course, there is the asset declaration, also, which of course was taken at the beginning, but continuously. There will be an exit one, which is one of the things which is being considered. So from the perspective of public financial management of, and activities of government, then this is a case for not just the Office of Special Prosecutor, the Primary for Internal Revenue Service with respect to, whether their incomes, their gifts, the sources, and the rest. This is quite, therefore, apart from what, we are built to discuss, which is the exposure which, government has to Bank of Ghana and which has resulted, among others, in a huge loss, by, Bank of Ghana, which is being reported.
Right, so 500,000 being kept at home. You've been finance minister before. What will compel such, an individual, in fact, to keep such a huge amount at home under, such an economy?
I wouldn't know, and I can't be specific except to state that we are a cash economy. We are a cash economy, and sometimes, especially people who are even quite affluent, keep cash at home. Many of us keep cash in our pockets, to buy, as I do. If you compare to the advanced countries where, where you have a credit card, your money is usually in the bank, and you have a credit card, you have a debit card. The debit card means they are taking the money directly from your account. With the bank, I think we have both debit and credit card in the country now. So I'm talking about the extent to which this is used to do business. In advanced countries and many middle-income countries, anytime you buy, even from retail outlets, you give them a card.
Yeah.
And they deduct the money directly from your account. Or if you use your credit card, it means they are giving you, a facility, a loan, which you pay when, at the end of the month, they add up all that you have used the card to pay, and then you pay. That is simply a loan. In our part of the world, people keep huge monies, with them for various reasons. Sometimes because they may not trust the banks, which link I can draw, because there have been incidents in our past, the issue of changing the currency to 50 Ghana cedis, new cedis, which led to some loss and confidence in the banking system back in the 90s. And then fast forward, if that experience is to go by, then the situation where individuals keep their money in banks or their pension funds are invested and you have the haircut and whatever, is another situation that may undermine confidence in the banking system, and therefore people will feel reluctant, either buying government bonds or even putting their money in the banks.
Great.
So that is the apart from the risk of you keeping money at home, which can be stolen and the rest, which is why people are it's part of the financial literacy program, of governments, all the way back from the His Excellency Kufuor's era through, the Mills Mahama, and it's continuing by the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Ghana itself. There's education for people, to put their money in the bank. You may earn some income, on it. And usually what you earn on savings, people say it's too small.
So let's do it this way. How do you keep such a huge amount at the bank in terms of dollars, and then looking at the exchange rate, at a point you see the cedi moving to 15 cedis, 14 cedis? Is that one also a factor why people are now preferring to keep monies at home?
Yeah, precisely the point I was going to make. If I keep my money, in my savings account, money which I don't need immediately, and I keep it in the savings account. In Ghana, the interest on the savings account is very, very low.
Yeah.
Right. I don't keep my excess funds in savings accounts, except what I may need to be used later on. But the interest rate is quite low, what the banks offer. But individuals and businesses have another option, which is that they can, through their banks, lend money to the government. So when you go to your bank and you say, oh, I have, let's say, 2 million, Ghana cedis, and I don't need it immediately, right? Can you invest in a treasury bill for me? Your money is being given as a loan to government, because the treasury bill is simply the certificate which you are given. It describes, and it's also another description is that it is the shortest of governments, the loans that government takes, 90 days. Yeah, the instrument, exactly, 90 days. So after 90 days or 91 days to be precise, then you can go back and say, if you need the money at the end of the 90 days, you can go back and collect your money. If you need the money before the 90 days, that's where what we call discounting comes in. The bank can pay you, the money, but you won't earn the interest for the
suffer
whole
a haircut.
Yeah. But that's voluntary, haircut, because you put the money in 90 days. So that is voluntary. So one advantage of huge sums of money, which is becoming an avenue, is to invest, the money through your bank in treasury bills, but you can also invest in the government's bonds. And the bonds, the popular ones we have are the 3-year and the 5-year bonds. So if you have money which you may not need immediately, maybe for your retirement or for whether you want to be taking just the interest, then you can put the money in for 3 years. And the government interest is usually high. The rate of the treasury bills now. So it's much higher.
Yeah.
Now, let me say that we didn't used to have government bonds and treasury bills being sold, treasury bills, being sold on the stock exchange. We've been talking about the banks. And why what is going on in Ghana is very important is this. In 2014, 2015, the then Mahama administration decided that, like other countries, is one way of saying deepening the domestic financial market. Mm-hmm. So normally it was Bank of Ghana that issued both the T-bills, and the bonds on behalf of government, right? But there is a market, there's an alternative market for dealing in bonds, dealing in those type of government instruments. In addition to what you may have heard, corporate bonds. Corporations can also borrow long term from that market, and that market is the stock exchange. So 2014, 15, they decided to put the government bonds on the stock exchange. And the stock exchange started marketing it aggressively. What is the advantage to government? The money is not just sitting there. If it's sitting in Bank of Ghana and you need your money, as I said, let's say after 1 year, even for 3 years, you lend the money to government and you need the money, right? It means that government would have to find the money, right, to pay you back. And it may not be in accordance with government schedule. But when you take it to the stock exchange, right, it is the same thing as savings and then loans. The money you put in as savings, the bank gives out as what? As loans.
Yeah.
Now, the same way, there is a supply of the bonds from government, okay? Now, the stock exchange expertise is that whilst you are selling, somebody also wants to buy. Absolutely. So they bring the two together. So without, governments having to cough the money all the time, that's why we say that the bond becomes marketable or tradable. It becomes like a commodity.
You can exchange.
So if I buy government bonds and I don't need it, or the pension funds use my money to buy government bonds, right? And they need money to pay, pensions. They'll go back quickly to the market, look for other pension funds who want to buy. So you are creating a market outside Bank of Ghana, outside the Ministry of Finance.
Which is subject to pricing, I guess.
But once in a while, government has to go in as part of its management to make sure that they reduce it so that it doesn't become a big burden as it has become today.
Right. So talking about losses, I'm sure you've seen Bank of Ghana's statement yesterday confirming that, let me say, justifying why they made that huge loss of 60.8 billion Ghana cedis in the 2022 fiscal year. You've seen it. They admitted that they were used, in the just ended domestic debt exchange program, and that but for Bank of Ghana, it would have been impossible for governments to secure the 3 billion IMF bailout package. What was your first reaction, probably when you saw that statement yesterday?
I would say unfortunate for, the one reason that I gave. But you see, I think that if let me take a little moment to explain so that our viewers and listeners will understand. So what is happening is that we spoke about individuals, right? Yeah. When I was talking, I spoke about individuals giving money to government through their banks or through the stock exchange, right?
Yeah.
Now, Bank of Ghana also gives money to government. And that is what we call deficit financing. So Bank of Ghana earns income and Bank of Ghana spends. Part of the income that Bank of Ghana earns is from its reserves or even the state's reserves to buy government bonds, to give loan to the Ministry of Finance, which is, if I say government, represented by the Ministry of Finance. Okay, are you following what I'm saying? Okay.
Absolutely.
So the bonds that we are talking about, Bank of Ghana also has an interest in it. Periodically, as part of its functions, Bank of Ghana also requires a certain percentage of deposits that are made in banks and the rest to be kept at Bank of Ghana. Okay, Bank of Ghana can also invest those monies. Okay. Now, because of the danger of government, not pulling its weight, to finance the deficit. Because remember, the government is borrowing because it has a deficit, which it has to finance through loans. So when we talk about loans, what we are talking about, the bonds, is part of what we call the domestic bonds, bonds that are generated internally. The danger of that is that because the Bank of Ghana can print money, the government may continue incurring deficits and deficits and deficits to the extent that Bank of Ghana.
When you say Bank of Ghana can print money, what are you trying to say?
Well,
because it may look a bit technical for some people. Can you break it down for us?
Let me come to that later on. Let me finish my thought on this one.
Absolutely.
So what is happening is that Bank of Ghana lends money. Our laws say that to avoid this danger which we are in now, where government will not pull its weight, if I may put it that way, to raise taxes and pay, the loans, and they will be on Bank of Ghana balance sheet. Bank of Ghana only wants to, invest and whatever. Bank of Ghana law says that it can only give 5%, the equivalent of 5% of revenue that was collected in the previous year to government.
That's per the law, isn't it?
Per the law. Now remember, we talk about zero financing. When we were doing the IMF program in 2015, the IMF said, no, Bank of Ghana should not even finance government at all, so that its balance sheet can be strong, so that it can work with banks, rather, the financial sector. So in 2016, actually, we are taking past loans. But in 2016, we did not take a new loan from Bank of Ghana to meet that zero financing. Despite we having the 5%, we had to meet, the condition. And the reason is exactly what we are saying. We are seeing now government continuing to borrow and borrow and borrow from Bank of Ghana to the extent that even if you put domestic debt exchange aside, right, government is unable to pay, right? Now, so when now you take the government, later on you can look at the appendix to the public debt report and educate your viewers. You will see the loans that are given to government by commercial banks, through the bonds which we discussed, loans that are given by Bank of Ghana, right? It's also there. Now that has become part of the bonds together what outsiders give to us, either domestic or external. So Bank of Ghana is now caught in the inability of government to pay foreigners, governments, when I say foreigners, like the IMF, the World Bank itself, who give us loans as well, the World Bank, African Development Bank, right? They are sources of loans. Yeah. We are unable to pay the interest and whatever. Now, Bank of Ghana is also not able to pay its own, Ghanaian citizens, right? Which is the bonds which government, the money which the government borrowed from us.
So in this case, technically, you are saying Bank of Ghana in this situation is being asked to save itself, one, save governments, and also come in to save, other creditors, the individual bondholders, foreigners who came here to buy bonds and all of those. Is that what you're saying?
One. So let's come to the haircut and the non-payment of interest which led to the haircut. First, to use your language, first Ghanaians are being asked involuntarily. Remember when I said voluntarily I can go and redeem and then I get a haircut. You use the expression haircut. That is voluntary. I told government I want to give you money for 3 months, right? Within 1 month, maybe I have my child is sick or whatever, and I go and I want, the money, right? You won't get your 3 months interest. The bank will also take some, charges from you and the rest. So that's the haircut that you are taking. You are not getting the full amount which you expected. Okay. Now, what we are seeing, so one, individuals are saving the government because the government is not able to pay those monies. Two, Bank of Ghana is also suffering like the individuals now. And that is why the bank has become, because government which borrowed, the ministry is not able to raise enough taxes, or it has overspent. This is where the expenditure question comes in. It has lived beyond its means, the usual expression, right? And therefore is unable to pay Bank of Ghana. Remember that money, which Bank of Ghana borrowed, is interest that it is earning from banks and from other, some that even external, right? Now it is also being asked, to cut. So Bank of Ghana is not saving itself. In fact, Bank of Ghana is in trouble.
It's in trouble.
Right? To save yourself is to say that when I take certain measures and I'm able to stand on my feet again. No.
But in fact, the same Bank of Ghana in this case is being asked to set up a recapitalization fund, although the World Bank is saying, I'll give you some monies. I do not know where the rest of the monies will come from. So if you say Bank of Ghana is not doing anything, how are they going to conduct that, recapitalization of the commercial banks?
The government, we should make a distinction between the activities of government, the Ministry of Finance, that led to the situation, and where Bank of Ghana finds itself. Remember, let me recap. Government is unable to pay interest and principal. Okay?
That's factual.
It doesn't matter who is holding that loan. I explained that it can be an individual like me and you through our pension or through our savings with the bank. It can be the commercial banks, savings that they mobilize or their own money which they have invested and given to government. And it can be Bank of Ghana, and it can be outsiders, right? Government is not able to meet, all these people, right? Their commitments. Now, after the haircut, remember, after the haircut, government is still unable to pay, because otherwise we would have gone to the market. That's why we don't have access to the sovereign bond market and the rest. Okay, government is still not able to pay. So what the World Bank is saying is that I am going to be giving you some money, so that until this problem is resolved, you don't create more crisis. So that when people come and they are in need, and they need even, let's say that I put in 100. I take a haircut of 20. I still have 80. Absolutely. I still have 80, right? And I still have need for the 80. But here is a government that's unable to, to pay the interest or the principal. So what the World Bank is coming and saying that, okay, you even have difficulty after the haircut. And therefore, to smooth the path, which is what IMF programs and World Bank measures and things are about, let me give you some breathing space by giving you some loan, by giving you, which is the 6 billion which the IMF is giving us, the equivalent, for the banking sector is what the World Bank and others are saying they are going to help us to set up. So it is a bridging loan to enable us correct, the situation, so that you don't have a panic. Otherwise, if that facility is not available, people will rush to the bank and go and get their money, and they cannot be paid. Now the interim amount is now going to be paid out of that. That is the essence of that loan.
So I see two balance sheets here. The balance sheets of the central bank, which they have a debt to GDP ratio of more than 70%. And then also the balance sheets of our central bank, which is the Bank of Ghana. And this is the situation. The government is so much, laden with debt that it is now shipping some of the monies that it is owing from its balance sheet and transporting it onto the balance sheet of a central bank and make that humongous loss of about $6 billion US. How dangerous is this for an economy which is under an IMF program and still will have a debt to GDP ratio of around 88% by 2026?
2 points. I already made that even within our own laws, we recognize the danger of what is happening today. And we say that Bank of Ghana should not give a loan above 5% of what GRA and others bring in. So if Bank of Ghana is to give a loan for 2023, our law says it shouldn't exceed 5% of the revenue that government collected in 2022. Okay, you follow the point. That is point number one about what we are saying. So let's say that we as Ghanaians, given our history, every country has those in their laws. And I made a point that it came to a head, from single spine to doomsor to all those, that, if Bank of Ghana were to continue, it would be a risk. So governments, even the IMF said it should be zero. So we didn't even reveal ourselves on the fight. The second point you are raising, you are right. That is what accountants say, that somebody's debit, somebody's debt is somebody's credit. It makes somebody a creditor. Yeah. So let us simplify it. If my brother, my blood brother or sibling, for that matter, gives me a loan, if I'm tough, I'm in a difficult situation, and he gives me a loan of 200 Ghana cedis, right? I owe him.
Yeah.
Right? So I become the debtor. That's what accountants call the debit. But he also sees me, he becomes a creditor to me. Right? So if I'm unable to pay the 200, my brother is also depleted. So the analogy you give should become very vivid in the sense that if Bank of Ghana, though a government agency, if an SOE, though a government agency, if a pension fund, though representing, pensioners, right, gives money to government, and the government is not able to pay, all those people suffer. But those who are outside will demand their money. Otherwise, you can't come to them again. And that is why we have to do the debt exchange. That's why we have to do haircuts and the rest. But the issue facing us is, why did we come to this point? We haven't come to this point. The closest we came, you have to go back to the 70s and 80s, droughts and other, forms, which led to the...
You won't compare to 2015, 2014?
Yeah. I'm referring to from 1983, 84, all the way, Dr. Butcher's time and the rest. That's when we had, something similar in the difficulty. Periodically, governments had some of these difficulties, and that is why we did IMF programs. But we have not come to this situation before. But I'm asking why. You recall what? That the problem is government. And the first point is, way back in 2017, we said that government cannot finance all the things it is telling Ghanaians it can do. Right? From free SHS to myself, 2017, honestly, on both sides. When I dare say that free SHS may be popular to many Ghanaians, but it is not feasible. We can say with hindsight, it's not everybody who is an accountant or public financial expert who would understand what one is saying. And especially when you do this and you raise the expectations of people who cannot send, their wards to school. And let me say frankly that I'm not talking from a position of somebody whose parents were well-to-do. I went to school on a cocoa board scholarship because my parents were cocoa farmers and my grandparents were cocoa farmers. Right? But in the absence of that, I would welcome anything free. It's like saying, come and line up, I'll give you food. Government says, come and line up, every day I'll give you food. It's impossible. That does not mean that you have been too wicked and you cannot, pay, you cannot take the needs of people who are really, really needy. They require it. That's why you have scholarships and the rest. So the first issue is that government expenditure was very high. Okay. The second issue is that if you look at the taxes that government bring in, despite the increases and everything, government has not been able to raise revenue beyond what the NDC was raising by 2015, 2015. In cedi terms, you will see it growing big. But when you express it as a percent of our income, what we call GDP, is flat. And it's in the program that we should do this. Okay. Now, what did government do? Instead of either reducing the expenditure, the flagship policies and the rest, right, which is a temptation we have been in for a very long time, government decided to borrow. And borrow to the extent that even the sinking fund that we started to stop this danger of borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and not paying, that was the essence which we used. And the current government used part of it to take off the first sovereign bond what we call His Excellency Kufuor's bond. 515 million of our oil money was used to take up, which was put, that scheme was stopped. But because of the borrowing space that was allowed, the government continued to borrow to finance, its ambitious, expenditure programs. And the warning was there, right? Remember that even on your show and others, people like myself, like Boppin, Issa, Boss, and everybody kept warning when we were using almost all our tax revenue first and then our total revenue to pay only two items, compensation and interest. It meant that everything else was depending on loans, right? And so it comes to a point where you have difficulty, you defer payments of interest. In some cases, we were not even paying principal because you take a loan. For example, let me give you a vivid example. When we did the first sovereign bond, we were paying interest. And the reason we had to set up the sinking fund was because by 2014, we were 3 years away from the 10 years, 2017. And we knew that at the NDC won the election, giving Doomsaw, giving single spine and all that, there was no way we were going to raise 750 million. You can raise it by going to borrow another 750 million. But bet you, they know your balance sheet and everything. So instead of giving you the 750 at 8.5, with the interest, with the
they'll raise the coupon
you
rate.
will be forced to borrow. Yeah, you'll be forced to borrow above 10%. You are seeing the explanation, why we did the bond for 2015 at 10.2. That is because we didn't have room for borrowing. And so we had to set up a sinking fund. And the World Bank had to provide a guarantee. This was taken as non-performance. And one would have thought that the government, would have taken a cue from it. And that is what averted the situation we are seeing, today. So the point in summary I'm saying is that when the government, was having difficulty to borrow, the second point which came out was, apart from what I said, is that it started depending on Bank of Ghana. It's not new. In fact, if you remember, despite we getting 6 billion, US dollar equivalent for COVID, right? If you remember, that 6 billion includes 10 billion from Bank of Ghana. If you remember.
That was the COVID-19 bonds.
Exactly. You're right. So that is part of the borrowing which is being written off today. Government borrowed that money.
So are you saying government is doing one problem, one bond, just like the minority are saying? One problem, one bond?
let me try and bring Ghanaian.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, more or less, yes. Because almost every Ghanaian is suffering. So yes, I do agree with that simple description. But we have to bear in mind is, as I was saying, we got to the point where we couldn't borrow. We got to the point, it started even before we couldn't borrow. Government, after taking almost 6 billion, let's say minus the 1.7 from Bank of Ghana for COVID, was still struggling. That would have been 4.3 or so billion. Remember when we do a correction for IMF programs, no government apart from this government got even more than 1 billion to do the correction. The Mama administration was the highest, which was 915 million. So despite those amounts, we could still not, meet our expenditure because the gap, that's where even the IMF has now said that there was a pre-existing, if you remember, a pre-existing gap before COVID. And our government should stop using COVID and the Ukraine war and others as an excuse and acknowledge that, right? Then it continued. Now, after exhausting all this, instead of cutting expenditure and raising more revenue, it continued to put pressure. Fast forward, that was 2020. Fast forward 2022. If the government says the deficit is 37 billion, and BOG at the time gave government almost 40 billion, what do you think BOG was doing? They were financing the entire deficit.
Absolutely. So financing that huge deficit. Usually, I'm sure at the negotiation table, the people present will be the governor, the finance minister, and I'm sure other representatives. So if you were to be the finance minister, 2-3 years ago, when we had this huge problem, what would you have done? Would you have allowed the Bank of Ghana to continue to fund your budget expenditure, or you would have said, I'm going to cut, so many things? What would you have done?
What did we do? Okay, I'm not going to speak as if I'm talking from theory. We faced a similar situation. We had Dumso, if you remember. We had single spine. Dumso was the result of the gas not flowing to Ghana, and therefore we, using private sector, using huge debt. What did we do? One, ESLA. We came in with ESLA and said to Ghanaians that this is not going to be a permanent form of tax.
ESLA was a levy, and this government also introduced similar, measures. They introduced the COVID-19 levy.
Instead of the government, first of all, instead of the government making sure that the ESLA money was used to pay the IPPs, used to pay who had borrowed from the banks and others, because we started that, it didn't. It rather collateralized the ESLA, took the money, and today ESLA has become part of DDE. You see the problem that we are having?
So an instrument that was supposed to be a push. Sure. Please continue.
Let me explain. So I don't. I said I want to point out what we did for Ghanaians to understand, right?
Yeah.
Because people say all government. No. Two. You remember that we said we were going to build 200 e-schools, equivalent of the progressively fee-free education. You remember that by 2015, when the crude oil prices fell from $99, President Mahama said, I'm not building 200 schools. It's just impossible. We said we'll do 120. As the situation continued, President Mahama came to public and said, it was a flagship for us also. We are going to do just about 60, right? And then, hopefully, when we won the elections back then in 2017 with 10 field and so forth, then we can come back to it. We cut expenditure. Remember, it was an election year. And at the time, this government was promising that, as for them, they can do free SHS. And you remember, President Mahama said, if you hadn't occupied this office, you can say things. I believe he said it to the current vice president, right? So we did cut expenditure. In spite of all this, what did we do in 2016? As I said earlier on, in 2016, our most difficult year, we did zero financing of the budget. That is, we did not borrow from Bank of Ghana under the IMF, conditions. And how did we do it?
I was just about asking you that.
Intensified revenue generation. We made sure that under the Treasury single account, the institutions that were holding government money, including the banks, and using it, to buy government's own debt and the rest, we made sure that we put an electronic platform through the gift miss. And the third one is the gift miss. So we stopped the misuse of government money, so government became liquid. And the third one was, gift miss. Frankly, most of my colleague ministers, what did we do with gift miss? If you are given a ceiling of 50, we stopped paper warrants. We were able to track. So what we said was, hey, watch it. If you allow, other people to use your ceiling, as you spend 10, it will warn you that you have 40 left. Another 20, it will warn you that you have 20 left. When you hit the 50, it stops. Gate will stop you electronically from spending. That's how come we were able to again achieve a 6.1% deficit in 2016. It wasn't 10%, it wasn't 8%. We created a contract database, the one that is telling us that government owes contracts of 77 billion today. We created it. It was 13 billion. It was politicized. So I'm giving you the practical steps, that we did, so that we are not talking theory.
Right.
What would you have done?
Right.
These are what we did. And upon all this, we put aside just 2 points. We put aside, 550 million, as I said, to pay out of the 750 a substantial part of the first sovereign bond. And then secondly, we use even part of the money to set up the infrastructure fund so that, it will do commercial projects, And in addition, if you remember when COVID came, We put money in the stabilization fund. The first 250 million that went to Parliament to retrieve was actually money left by the Mahama administration. So these are practical steps that we did, which prevented us from being in the situation that Ghana is in today.
Right.
I want to be very specific, on this part. Yeah.
Sure. So stay with me. I want to take a quick break. I'll be back. And thank you very much for staying with us on Upfront on the Joy News channel. My guest is still former Finance Minister, Seth Terkper. Now, Honorable, I want to ask you this, important question. The Bank of Ghana yesterday, when they issued that press release, they made it categorical that there's never going to be a point where they will become insolvent. They are not like commercial banks. But Bank of Ghana is supposed to be the lender of last resort, and I'm actually alarmed about the $6 billion, worth of loss that it made in 2022. Is it factual to say that there's never going to be a point where our central bank will be insolvent? And if they cannot be insolvent, would this $6 billion loss have any impact negatively on their independence and also their ability to perform moral suasion?
Is it because they are writing off a debt, which in principle is a government debt, government to government itself? Is that what is making us complacent? I read the report. And you remember when we were talking about the debt levels, we were told by the Minister of Finance at the time, his statement was issued, that countries like UK and the rest, had debt also even sometimes above 100% and were able to manage. And we responded that monkeys play by sizes. We should be careful. They have the capacity to absorb. It's like, just let me use a practical example. What is the effect of Fitch downgrade on Ghana compared to Fitch downgrade of the US? When we were at B- and were downgraded to C, so we were moving towards job. The US was AAA, AAA, topmost. They just notched off one of the A's and still they are AA plus.
And we are currently at RD.
Anybody will give, we are currently job. We are not even rated in made by some of them. Right? You see the difference? So, and I read the Bank of Ghana statement. I think we should stop the complacency, by comparing ourselves and saying that after all, banks in some of the advanced countries that were listed, I don't have the statement here, are surviving. We could collapse faster, right? Remember that what we're talking about, the loans that were given by Bank of Ghana is not just Bank of Ghana money. Remember that before Bank of Ghana could print money or Bank of Ghana could itself, use other people's money and the rest, it started using our reserves.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And then also, yes. And when they gave COVID example, some of those countries that got their SDR, so long as you are a member of the IMF, you got SDR because it is part of your capital. What did they do? They gave their share of the SDR to developing countries. Was Ghana capable of giving its part of SDR to any country?
We spent hours probably to pay interest on foreign loans.
Precisely. Yes. So we are talking about the extent to which the bank will be weakened. We are not, even if no government would allow its central bank, right? If we say it goes bankrupt, what does it mean? Are we saying that we won't have a central bank? How would we regulate, the banks? Bank of Ghana performs other functions, which it has to perform, right? Even on a very lean budget, bank supervision. So if all of its income is depleted, losses, is not earning the portion of income from government, right? How is it going to do effective banking supervision? How is he going to do all of that? Right? We know it. You know very well that even if you do not, it's just like the Ministry of Finance. If we say that the Ministry of Finance would never, collapse, it will never, and government is bankrupt, the government is still in quote. The government is still spending, it's still borrowing T-bills mainly and others. It still has some money spending. It will get money from the IMF, from the World Bank, and others. It will continue. It doesn't mean that Ghana's state is weak. It doesn't mean that.
I mean, the expenditure looks as if it's coming from both sides. The government is spending on so many other consumption, items. Bank of Ghana just gave a green light to spend close to $250 million to construct a new head office. Do you think this is legitimate at a time where there was even the same amount in Parliament as a loan to be approved?
Tells you the capability of Bank of Ghana, how the current, and the difference between the Bank of Ghana we have today and back then. The question you have to ask is, how come Bank of Ghana is able to support, even institutions like Legon to do the city conference hall, the Bank of Ghana hospital? That's because it was allowed to make profits. It wouldn't have been able to do these things successively over the years. So yes, it may be able to build these headquarters, but is a bank serving society as it used to be? No, it's not going to be possible. It will have to curtail, unless it's going to also spend and keep spending and borrowing from where? Like the government. It's not capable. So the capability of the Bank of Ghana is not measured by how much haircut it is taking or not. It is measured by how useful, it is, to the economy.
So
right?
so
this is the
yeah.
reason, yes. So
wrapping up our conversation, I want to ask, do you agree that this is a time for the central, the Bank of Ghana boss to resign? The minority have given him an ultimatum, 21 days, that he should resign. Do you think there's a time for the Bank of Ghana to say goodbye and hang his boots?
Let me say in principle, I'm a member of that. I'm represented, by that minority.
You belong to that school of thought, right?
No, what I mean is that, I'm NDC, right? I hold NDC portfolio. I can dissociate myself, from what my leadership is saying. But I'm saying that even the majority in Parliament, remember the issue, with the minister himself, it had to do, with the fiscal. So it's not a lesson for the minority alone. It's not an issue, a call to be made by the minority alone. We are seeing the results, of why people were victory on both sides of the house. It's the call is not coming, just in this instance. And that's what I want Ghanaians to understand. And to wrap up, let me say something. I've said it before. Bank of Ghana has extreme independence, right? To the extent that, you remember when the speaker asked Bank of Ghana to come and explain how they were financing the deficit about 2 years ago, if you remember.
Yeah, I do. Very much so.
The bank asked its lawyers to write to the governor to say that they're independent. Sorry, to write to the speaker to say that they're independent. Right? When elsewhere, independence should be differentiated from accountability. And Bank of Ghana could probably have been shielded by Parliament. Right? Because remember, the financing, what is Bank of Ghana financing? And what financing is Bank of Ghana helping to exceed? Bank of Ghana is financing the amount of borrowing that government should do as part of the Appropriation Act, which only the Constitution gives to Parliament. Are you following what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So, yes, and this is the reason why even in the mighty United States, in the mighty UK, the first chairman are equivalent of the governor. Every quarter goes to Congress, they go to Senate, right? to give accountability to the people through their representatives. And they agreed. And the whole world follows. And you know, when a Fed chairman talks, the whole world has to listen because it affects, the US is the dominant economy and affects everybody. It doesn't take away the independence because when it came to the point for the Fed chairman to accept his independence, right? President Biden was not happy. The interest rates were going to be raised just when he wants to create jobs and the rest, right? But even President Biden will say that he respects the independence, of the central bank when he was asked.
Right.
And that he disagree with their policies, but he agrees, So I think that measure of accountability, I've said it before, is required, as part of our laws, so that it's at the minimum, if not the whole house, just as by the way, the Constitution requires that they go to Parliament, in the case of foreign exchange dealings and the rest. I think that the Bank of Ghana, even voluntarily, if it's not in their law, accountability, because only Parliament could have sealed it, because the spending has been done beyond what Parliament approves. The Constitution says that it is only Parliament that, should, one, impose taxes. It's only Parliament that can say how much of that taxes should be spent. And it's only Parliament in Article 1815 that says that, when there is the need to borrow, right? Do we have to extend, the Parliament's control over borrowing to Bank of Ghana for us to understand the meaning of that? That's where we are now.
Right.
Because if they had been subjected themselves, then this issue would have come out and they would have had an explanation.
Absolutely.
And would have known that it is deficit financing that is. So I'm raising the issue of accountability, which I think is very important.
Well, I guess this is where time will allow us to peg our conversation. I'm grateful that you could join us. Seth Terkper is a former finance minister. Up next is Joy News Prime. You can log on to my jawline for more stories.